10 Life Factors. Welcome, Danny Arao. Danny is an educator and a journalist, alien from the Philippines. But Danny's going to share a little more about what he actually does. His Twitter page is chock full with all sorts of interesting social, educational, political things. And we're going to talk about grade inflation today in the college setting. But I'm going to let Danny just share who he is. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to be here. I'm Danny. As you correctly noted, I'm a teacher and a journalist here in the Philippines. For those who may not be familiar with what the Philippines is, we're located in Southeast Asia. We're a population of about 110 million. And right now, I'm wearing black because the election happened just last month, and the son of the dictator unfortunately got elected. So much of the media are grieving right now because of the election results. But of course, the struggle goes on.
Yeah.
I'm currently associate professor at the University of the Philippines. I'm also associate editor of an online publication. It's called Bulatlat. It's in Filipino language, but basically it's in English. So just recently, our website was censored by the Philippine government because we are allegedly linked with communist and terrorist groups, which is not true, by the way. So there are a lot of problems besetting us right now. And incidentally, my university has also been criticized by the government for cuddling allegedly communists and terrorists. So I guess it's a fun time to be in the Philippines right now. I'm just kidding. But that's what's happening. And I've been teaching Sonia for more than 20 years now, full time. And my journalism dates back to the time when I was still a campus journalist, also at the University of the Philippines. So I graduated from the university where I'm teaching right now. And I started my journalism as a campus journalist in 1988. So that was before you were born, I guess. So I've been doing journalism, for quite a long time now, several decades already. So I guess that's me in a nutshell. But there are a lot of things about me still, but nevertheless, that's the, long and short of it.
And that's so rich, so many information, so much information you've shared already. And thank you for informing us of what is going on in the Philippines. I'm sure it's, or news media is, or should I say social media is so open nowadays that information is, so there's some of what you shared, I'm kind of aware of it. So I understand. These are the things, there's this phenomenon that is taking a place across the world. It's a global thing based on what you mentioned about the media, the government, and all the different political conflict that is happening based on people's values and interests. So, and it is very interesting too that you are connected in two arenas in terms of journalism and the education field, and you're doing both. So I can understand the richness in your background. And thank you so much. I think that there's so much that we could talk about, but I really want to focus today on your educational background in terms of your teaching at the University of the Philippines. And you said you've been teaching for a very long time. One of the things that I'm curious about is how does your university address, and can you tell me if it's undergrad or graduate program that you're teaching in, by the way, before I went into the question?
I teach at both levels, at the undergraduate level and the graduate level.
Mm-hmm.
But since I'm still in the process of getting my PhD, I still haven't taught at the doctoral level. So I'm still teaching at the master's level.
Okay, good, good. Thank you. And so what is it, what is your student population like in terms of specific to your journalism program? What is the student population like?
Okay, we are roughly, well, we are a relatively small college, so
Mhm.
we have around 250 journalism students right now. It is small because the population of the entire University of the Philippines, Diliman, would be something like 25,000 students. So it's a relatively small percentage. However, the college that I belong to, because I belong to the Department of Journalism,
Mhm.
which is under the College of Mass Communication, so we have around 1,000 uh, College of Mass Communication students, of which one-fourth would be journalism students. So that's to give you a perspective of how many 250 students would be relative to the college and the university.
Do you have an international body of students? Do you have students coming from different countries to enroll in your journalism program?
Not so much. Every now and then we have exchange students from other universities, but usually the majority of our students would be Filipino students. So that would explain why our medium of instruction is either English or Filipino. In my case, it's bilingual. So that's why my students can submit media output whether in English or in Filipino. So we try to make them more comfortable with the language that they're accustomed to. And to be frank about it, not that I'm discriminating against English, but it's just that in our case here in the Philippines, we would rather let them focus on the Filipino language
Yes.
because something you have to know about the Philippines, I'm sure you're aware of our history. We were colonized by three countries. One of them would be the USA. And one of the things that the US did was to, meddle with our educational system, wherein English would be the sort of the unofficial medium of instruction. So what used to be, in the Constitution, we're supposed to strengthen our own language, but right now the reverse is true. So we're now focused more on English proficiency rather than the Filipino language proficiency. And that's the thing that we want to correct because even in the journalism landscape in the Philippines right now, many journalists speak in Filipino, but because of the colonial perspective on language,
Mhm.
people think that if the journalism is in English, it's the more intelligent form of journalism. And that, the uninformed and non-intelligent ones will be the ones in Filipino. That's why sometimes Filipino journalism is equated with sensationalism and all
Mhm.
other unethical practices in journalism. Yeah, I'm sorry if I'm telling you a lot of things already beyond your question, but it's just to give us an idea of why the university is designed like that and why our curriculum would tend to focus more on the Filipino language. So in case there are foreigners coming in to my classroom, I've experienced that in the past, especially at the graduate level.
Mhm.
We're more than happy to adjust, the manner of teaching so that we can accommodate everybody, so that we can more or less understand each other. So the good thing about University of the Philippines students is that technically UP is the top university in the country, so we're able to invite the best and the brightest students.
Yeah.
So to be fair, they are very familiar, they are very adept when it comes to speaking and writing in English. Their level of comprehension, English comprehension, is quite high. So it's not so difficult for them to adjust or to suddenly switching, to a different language from Filipino to English. They can easily adapt, to such changes in the learning environment.
And you're saying it is, are you saying it's necessary, or necessary in terms of what the university is requiring to adapt students to both languages, even though you're saying it is preferred for students to default to the Filipino language and not using what label as the colonial idiom? Which
Yeah.
which side are, I mean, what is there some, it appears as if there's some type of struggle in how you
Yeah.
address the curriculum content, in whether or not it's English or it's the Filipino language as you define as well. It seems as if when you write stories in that language, it come out as being too sensationalistic.
Yeah.
Got it?
Yeah. Actually, that's a good question. Because of academic freedom in our university, we allow our faculty to do whatever they want. So if a faculty member prefers to speak in English or is more comfortable with English,
Mhm.
then he or she can do so. So what I told you a while ago was just my personal preference,
Okay.
and I'm confident that many of my colleagues would feel the same way
Mhm.
when it comes to giving more preference to the Filipino language. However, sometimes, there's a saying, talk is cheap, right? So some people would say that, oh yes, Filipino language should be promoted, but in actuality, what they do is they focus more uh, on the English language because something you have to know about the Philippines, at the basic education level, elementary and high school, depending on the school that you went to, if it's
Mhm.
an expensive school, if it's a high quality school, usually it's in English. And in fact, we have schools whose marketing strategy is to tell the whole world that they are an English only learning institution. We have that. And in fact, some universities would have, posted on their halls English speaking zone. So it means that if you're
Nice.
physically there, you
Yes.
have to speak in English. And if you have to deal with with the faculty or even the administrative staff, you have to speak in English. So the only places, actually, there's a running joke in some universities. Please bear with me because this is a good joke. uh, some of them, the students, they can only speak their own language in the restrooms or in the toilets because there's no signed English speaking zone there. So that's the only time that they can speak in their own language. But when they're inside the classroom, when they're in the hallway, then they have to speak in English. So that's the reality in the educational system right now. And that would partly explain why, if we want to zero in on the topic of grade inflation, much of the mindset of people is to really have a career more than anything else, instead of doing civic work, doing voluntary work for the good of the country. After graduation, they would rather focus on going up the corporate ladder.
That
And English, sorry, go ahead. Sorry, go
see,
ahead.
I know, and I appreciate you keeping up with the theme, but you're saying something very interesting. So if you don't mind, I want to go back to
Yes.
something that you said. There's no rules here in terms of we have to stay on topic, so it's okay.
Okay.
So because you said something very interesting, and I want to be able to share this information or this knowledge. For me, it would be now because I'm learning something new here. You started out by telling, kind of contrasting between what is happening in the School of Journalism between the use of languages. You mentioned the Filipino, and I'm correct in saying Filipino language. Is that okay for
Yes,
me to say? And the
that's
English
correct.
and the English language, and all of this is stemming from the remnants of colonialism. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
So now you're in the School of Journalism, and you've been teaching in that program for I think you said 18 to 20 years, somewhere there. Yes.
21 years to be exact.
Yes. And
21, yeah.
so your observation is that there's some emphasis or push to teach in the using the English language, not just in your University of the Philippines, but
Yeah,
in many other schools, to the point where they're even putting up signs to say English speaking zone only.
Yes, that's correct.
where students speak in their own local language or dialects um, will only do so in private settings like a bathroom or in a
Yeah,
hallway. That is very, very interesting and very concerning, actually.
yeah,
Um,
definitely. You're correct.
and so even in terms of publication, in terms of writing, then writing a news story, it is expected that the story is published in the English language versus publish it in the native language.
Correct. Sometimes because of the lack of focus on Filipino proficiency, the students would sometimes default to writing in English. And it's in my experience also, many students have told me they write much faster, they write more effectively in English rather than in Filipino. Why? Because as early as the elementary and high school levels, they are taught to be more proficient in English
Mhm.
rather than in Filipino. So don't get me wrong, there are also publications in
Yeah.
Filipino, but
Mhm.
they're not really, developed that much.
Yes.
And if you go to the more expensive schools where you have, families of rich, you have students coming from very rich families, usually
Mhm.
they are the ones who are more proficient in English. And that's where many public campus publications, for example, would be written in English. And if you talk about the faculty for a while, many of our publications would tend to be, not always, but most of them would be in English because you get more points for promotion if you publish in international publications. And of
Yes.
course, by default, the international language would be in English. So that's the case right now. But again, don't get me wrong, there are refereed journals in the local languages, but the
Mhm.
problem is they're not international. So you get less points or fewer points for tenure or for promotion if you write in the national language. So that's the dilemma right now. So that would explain why you may have noticed in my profile that's publicly available, I've written many books in the
Yes.
Filipino language. But
Mhm.
the problem here is internationally it cannot be recognized. But my objective in writing these books, it's not really for promotion or for tenure. I'm satisfied with where I am right now. It's meant to communicate, to a much larger audience in the Philippines. They can better understand me writing in Filipino instead of me writing in English. Don't get me wrong, I can write in English if I want to, but
Mhm.
only if I'm communicating with international audiences. But since my preference is to communicate with, my fellow Filipinos, then I would use my own language. So that's the kind of dilemma being faced by the students. We're not blaming the students if their mindset is too English oriented. We blame the educational system for producing students like that.
And describe the University of the Philippine entity. Is it government, public, or private?
It's public, so it's funded by the state, by taxpayers' money. So
And
that's why
so,
tuition is relatively cheap there. Sorry, go ahead. Yes.
and the curriculum is approved by the board of, um, is it approved within the university in terms of the committee? How much influence in terms of what I really am asking is there a clear conflict? You talk about your own personal views on this, but is there a clear conflict in terms of the curriculum development and what should be um, taught or instructed to the students in terms of the language and how it's conveyed? Is there, I know there's committees and different committees that develop curriculum, but where is the center of this? Where is it coming from in order to be dispersed in the department?
Okay. Under the well, in the Philippines, the University of the Philippines is recognized as the national university. So we have a lot of independence in terms of how we craft our own curriculum.
Mhm.
So, for example, if we want to make changes in the journalism curriculum, it only has to be approved at the university level. The
Mm-hmm.
Philippine government doesn't need to approve that. I need to mention that, Sonia, because in the Philippines, we have a Commission on Higher Education. So that's the one that more or less harmonizes or synthesizes
Mm-hmm.
the different curricula in various state universities and colleges and even private universities. So the Commission on Higher Education is in charge of that. But here's the thing. Much of the commissioners and the chair of the Commission on Higher Education, many of them are from our own university. In fact, their office is physically located within university property.
Ah,
So the Commission on Higher Education doesn't really interfere with us. In fact, they consult us
okay.
on various matters pertaining to the curriculum. So that's why on paper you can argue that maybe the Commission on Higher Education should supervise the university, but in practice they don't do that, and they don't dare do that because we are considered already as the national university under the law. So right now, in terms of curriculum development, we have a lot of independence. We only need approval of the university administration to make sure that we are able to implement whatever changes we have in the curriculum. Just like other universities abroad, we make changes in the curriculum every 3 years or every 5 years or so that we remain relevant. But for individual courses, we can introduce them whenever we feel that there's a need to make changes. But the overall curriculum, I hope you get what I mean. The
Yes.
overall system, the overall 4-year degree program, for example, for journalism, it's up for review usually maybe 3 or 5 years to incorporate, changes in the situation of journalism or
Mm-hmm.
even globally, nationally and globally.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And in terms of within the program itself, for those students who are now clearly journalism major, they're getting their degree, they're planning to, to that's their career area. What are their concerns or opinion on this the overuse or the concentration of English language in the program in terms of writing and publishing?
Okay. Many of the graduates see the need to focus on the Filipino language, but the reality in the media industry right now is that many of them are really English oriented. So you talk about CNN Philippines, we have that here. You talk about the leading networks that use the English language as well. Now, here's the thing. Primetime news in the Philippines would be in Filipino, okay, language.
Okay.
But here's an interesting nuance. It may be in Filipino, but many of the sources of information, especially the government officials, they tend to speak in English. So sometimes, even if the newscast is largely in Filipino, you have sound bites coming from, policymakers or even, academics like me who would get interviewed every now and then
Mm-hmm.
speaking in English. So that's the problem right now. So sometimes there's a disconnect. We're not saying that we have to be purists in the use of the language. Code switching is allowed, don't get me wrong. But
Mm-hmm.
when you have sources of information who would prefer to speak in English, much of the documentation in Congress or even in the courts here in the country, they're practically written in English. Court pleadings are in English. And sometimes when you have witnesses speaking in Filipino, the transcription would have to be translate. There would have to be a translation in English
Mm-hmm.
so that you can be consistent in the language that you're using. So that's the problem with media right now. So sometimes there are certain venues to
Mm-hmm.
allow the reports in the Filipino language, but sources of information, references would tend to be in English. So sometimes you gravitate toward English and you're forced to use certain English terms and certain framing in English in order to get the message across to people. So sometimes there's that problem.
Mm-hmm. So you use the word problem several times. And so let
Yeah.
me, problems from which perspective? For whom? Problem for whom? I know you mentioned
Yes.
policymakers are communicating to the public in English. And so it could be, as I said, you use the term code switching. Is anyone recognize, are the laymen, the local people recognizing this as code switching? And are you saying it's a loss in translation where they're not getting the information in the way that they should? So the question remains,
Okay.
problem for whom? From whose perspective?
Yeah. It's problem for the marginalized and underrepresented Filipinos because in media we have to acknowledge the theory called limited effects theory and
Mhm.
uses and gratification theories in communication because sometimes you are able to understand media content based on your level of education, based on your mastery of the language, among many other factors. So if you're from the middle class or if you're from rich families, and if you're well educated enough, English will not be much of a problem for you. But
Mhm.
we cannot say the same thing for poor people who have barely stepped into school. Statistics show that education is more of a privilege rather than a right in the Philippines. Not all people are able to enter college. In fact, not all people are even able to finish high school for that matter. So especially people in the countryside. So if you have a news program, let's say you're able to watch a news program, and then there is code switching going on, and then the important sound bites would be in English. So the problem there is, if you are from the marginalized and underrepresented, you are deprived of the opportunity to fully understand the intended message. Maybe you can catch some glimpses of the message based on the words that you can understand, but the entire message may be lost in translation, so to speak, as you try to decipher what you're trying to get out of it. So the problem, it's good that you mentioned for whom is the problem. So
Yeah.
we tend to focus more on the marginalized and underrepresented because the premise here is no one should be left behind in
Mhm.
terms of trying to comprehend important events that are happening every day.
And it is agreeable. Do you believe that it's more appealing to an international audience because of
Hmm.
because of globalization, social media? Our world is getting smaller and smaller in the information are moving like at the speed of light. And part capitalism as well. So they have to be part of this postmodern way of
Yes.
sharing of information, getting information in, getting information out. And so everybody simply have to just get on this train or this bandwagon. And it's impacting the educational institution, and it's impacting policy, it's impacting government, and as a result, it impact everybody's way of life. Yes?
Yes, actually, I've written a paper about it regarding the globalization of
Mhm.
education, and you're very on point when it comes to trying to trace the roots of the situation in our educational system right now. So it's basically because of the outward-looking perspective of our government that we tend to focus more on English at the expense of the Filipino language. Why? Because if your economy is more export oriented, more foreign investment led, and you want to invite more transnational corporations coming in, then you have to adjust to the international audience. So instead of them adjusting to you, you end up adjusting to them. And right now, I'm sure you're aware in the Philippines, the business process outsourcing industry is now a sunshine industry in the sense that they're like mushrooms coming, sprouting in every part of the Philippines.
Yes.
So when we say business process outsourcing for the benefit of the public, we talk about call center agents. So sometimes, since we were colonized by the US, we can more or less imitate the American accent. Of course, we don't do a good job at it, but maybe we can pull it off a little bit. So we can more
Mhm.
or less try to do that. And that's why right now, many Filipinos are now nocturnal creatures. Why are they nocturnal? Because of the time zone. Right now, as we speak, we have a 12-hour difference.
Yes.
So many employees in business process outsourcing industries, they
Yes.
start their day at night because many of the clients from the West, like in the United States, would be doing their business at that particular time. So what's that got to do with English? English becomes a comparative advantage right now, especially if you want quick money. Because this is the amazing thing about business process outsourcing,
Mhm.
they earn more than journalists. Much as I hate to admit it, and they earn much at a very very young age. Their entry level salary is very high. And sometimes our communication graduates and journalism graduates,
Mhm.
especially those from poor families, they end up not going into the media because it's very dangerous to be in media, and you don't get much in terms of salary.
Mhm.
But if you're a call center agent, you just sit for 8 hours, talking to irate clients and angry clients, speaking in English, pretending not to be in the Philippines, pretending to have an American name. Sometimes that happens as well. So yeah, that happens. So you can
You
call,
know,
so for example, my name is Danilo. You can call me Daniel, for example. That would be my alias. So
mhm.
that's what's happening right now in the Philippines. And in the context of English, people don't mind. For as long as you earn money, you really don't mind whether or not you're being alienated in your own country, or you end up being more proficient in a foreign language instead of
Mhm.
the local language, for as long as you earn money. And unfortunately, that's the sad reality. Don't get me wrong, we don't blame people for that. It's the system that's broken right now. I'm sorry to say. Yeah.
It's interesting that, I mean, you shared a lot there, which is for example, for people observing impact of globalization, as you mentioned, you wrote a paper on that. It would consider it a very, very sad state of things that are occurring. And also that you're saying, well, people do not mind. But the key word is awareness. Are they aware of this exploitation? And are they aware of this major changes in their culture? And especially for those who are born um, in the process of it, that is now, we'll consider it the norm then. The norm, this is the way things are, this is the way things will be, and this is the way things should be. Um, later on when they become college students in your classroom, I can imagine the arguments around
Yeah.
on that. So it is very interesting. But hold it there, Danny. We're going to pause for one moment. Okay. I just want to
Sure.
let me summarize here. So we're talking to Danilo Arao. He's a professor at the University of the Philippines. He's sharing a lot today. We were supposed to be talking about great inflation, and we will. I think
Yeah.
we're going to have to come back to that. But he's,
Yeah.
I am always a curious mind, and the population I serve, youth and families, they're always curious about information, and I like the way you're breaking it down. And so he's talking about the impact of colonialism on education in terms of, for example, in his journalism program. And then we're looking at how far reaching it is, not just within the walls of the university, but across the Philippines, where the impact of, and this could be, the impact of globalization as as kind of this far-reaching effect on its citizens, regardless of their economic status, and also in terms of job opportunities, where people are seeing, well, if I give up my culture and be
Yes.
more immersed in another culture, which is the so-called dominant culture in the world, which is European culture, then the opportunities are. So we're continuing with Danilo Arao is with the University of Philippines. He's a professor there for over 21 years. And we're talking about some very interesting thing happening in the Philippines, and is in terms of language. And I'm learning a lot today. And one of the piece that where we left off, we were talking about the impact of communicating in the English language, and how, to layman people, how it's impacting businesses, how it's impacting even students graduating from your program who may have a journalism degree, but choose to work in one of those outsourcing organizations because they feel that they're making more money and they get to practice their
Yes.
English language. But you say something interesting where you said they even get to choose an European name.
Yeah. That's normal in certain call center offices. Not all, but I do know that some of them pretend to be somebody they're not. Okay, so they try to adapt a certain accent, particularly an American accent, and then in order to be more endearing to whoever is on the other line, they tend to use a different name. That happens not just in the Philippines but also in India, where they prefer not to use their Indian name but would rather adopt the American name. But if we were to change the topic a little bit, which is still somewhat related to graduation of students, the
Mhm.
other aspect of the reality in the Philippines is labor migration. So many people go overseas because they want to seek greener pastures, so to speak. So that's where English, again, becomes a comparative advantage. If
Yeah.
you end up in the US, Canada, Australia, the UK, or
Mhm.
any other English-speaking nation or country, you would be able to get, better let's say better terms with your employer, and you have better chances of being employed right off the bat if you can speak the language. And that's also true for non-English speaking countries. I do know that there are a lot of overseas Filipino workers who speak fluent Japanese, even if they haven't taken formal classes, because that's part of the survival skill of anybody. You have to adjust to the situation. So
Mhm.
you have to learn another language. And in my experience, I was a visiting professor in Korea uh, a few decades, in 2009.
Mhm.
So a long time ago. And I've had the experience of meeting Filipinos there who are who have been, working for a long time. They know how to read, they know how to speak Korean or
Mhm.
Hangul to be more specific. And that's part of their survival skill. Now, the bottom line here is learning a new language is good if you want to, adapt to certain environments. But if the educational system is designed so that you can fully use and maximize English as part of your comparative advantage, because your perspective is to go abroad or to get a high paying job
Mhm.
in a big transnational corporation,
Mhm.
then there's still something wrong. So the bottom line here, Sonia, is that in any educational venture, learning a language is supposed to be a fruitful experience. It's
Yes.
supposed to open your eyes culturally,
Mhm.
certain ways of life outside yours. But
Mhm.
it has to be a choice, and it should not be, as if your survival would depend on it. And that's what's happening in the Philippines. You have to learn English to survive. And for us, and
And
for
it
me,
shouldn't
that's very problematic. Yeah,
it
sorry.
is problematic because it shouldn't be where you mentioned where people are actually, it's as if you have to give up your ethnic identity, your national heritage,
Yes.
national identity, in order to gain an advantage in this
Yes.
capitalistic world that we're living in. And so, what are the themes around that though? Is there any built-in themes within the journalism program to talk about journalism, doing journalism, communication, and identity? Is there any aspect of the curriculum that address that to create this awareness in students that, okay, this is what is happening. This is the history of our country.
Yeah.
This is the history of the culture. And this is how changes are occurring, and kind of create that path of awareness so that they can, while embracing their identity, but at the same time, embodying knowledge and opportunities and ways to, yes, have a global kind of perspective. How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's not just solely the responsibility of the major courses in journalism to provide that perspective. It is also through what we call general education courses in
Okay.
the arts, in the humanities, and even in the sciences. Part of the process in education at the higher education level would be to provide a more holistic outlook on society, how you view life,
Mm-hmm.
how, in the grander scheme of things, problems are major, problems are minor, and that you should know how to appreciate the kind of life you're living in. And at the same time, you try to change the things that are very problematic and that are inherently systemic. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where the social sciences are important in journalism, along with the arts and the humanities. But here's the problem, not just in the University of the Philippines, but also in other universities.
Mm-hmm.
The general education program is under attack. And just a few years ago, we had to debate with the University Council, and we lost. And what happened there is they cut down on the number of units for the general education program,
Hmm.
even to the point where, in some cases, the study of Philippine history can become optional. Okay? So there's the problem. And actually, even in the K to 12 program, we call it K to 12, elementary and high school. I think you have the same terms there
Yes.
in the
Yes.
US. Even in the K to 12 program, the perspective of those who crafted the K to 12 program, which was implemented just a few years ago, was to enhance the skills of the students so that you don't need to go to college to gain employment.
Right.
So that's what's happening. So it's very, very skills based. And right now, there's not much room for critical thinking, for introducing certain pedagogies that would
Mm-hmm.
ensure that you would have a holistic learning environment. And in fact, what's laughable about the media and information literacy program in the K to 12 under K to 12? I studied it because they tried to consult me on the matter. It's more focused on information technology and computers, instead of ethics, instead of media education, instead of the role of media in shaping society and all that. I
Right.
mean, some of them are discussed, but it's more focused on the technology aspect. Why? Because you need that for employment in the
Mm-hmm.
near future. So, and even in the journalism curriculum, at least in the University of the Philippines, it's not much of a
Mm-hmm.
problem because some of our faculty are very conscious of critical analysis and the critical aspect of journalism, how to ensure that you're able to help shape public opinion. But in other schools, they focus more on grammar, syntax, diction, how to write a good lead, how to write a good feature story without depth of analysis. And sometimes, even in the K to 12 program, I also was consulted on the special program for journalism at the senior high school level.
Mhm.
Many school administrators focus on winning journalism contests instead of developing the campus publication to help in the shaping of public opinion in the community. So they are focused more on getting medals, on getting awards. And why do administrators do that? Because the Department of Education can provide more incentives to the winners of the schools. They get more funding for that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's a really a vicious cycle. And you don't blame the school administrators for sometimes having that perspective, because if you're an administrator, you're thinking of money
Mhm.
that would come in so that you can sustain your school.
Mhm.
So the problem is really the system. So that's why sometimes going back to my experience as well as the experience in the university, when
Mhm.
we try to raise such issues on the need for critical analysis, on the need for engagement
Mhm.
with more in-depth reportage and all that, we get labeled as subversive, communists, and all that. So that's the problem that we're facing. And right now, just so you know, here in the country, if you are red tagged, it's very, very serious. It can get you arrested. Some of my friends have been arrested because they were accused of being communists. Some of them have been killed. So it's a very serious matter when you're red tagged. So it's not just a label. It's not just a word.
Yes.
It puts a target on your back, and you have to be very careful once you are red tagged. So that's why many people are afraid of what's happening. And sometimes they, I really can't blame some of my friends. Some of them have decided to just simply keep quiet and
Mhm.
just simply, well, go through the motion of teaching and wait until they turn 65 so that they can retire and get their pension. So they've practically given up on the need to, better shape
Mhm.
the future by honing the skills of the youth of today. So yeah, so it's a very vicious cycle, and it's a very, very endemic
Mhm.
problem, not just in the educational system, but also in society in general.
It's so sad. Yes. Very, very interesting points that you're making, and that the connection. A lot of times when there's political issues in society, which is ongoing anyway, or conflict, they tend to pull the experts from universities to
Yeah.
speak on the subject. And a lot of times their word, university professors, and their words tend to be gospel, because you're doing academic research, you're adding new knowledge to our to journals. And as you mentioned, one of the encouragement is to make sure that for professors at the universities there, to make sure you're publishing in English so that it can reach an international audience. So I do understand the fear that may comes with wanting to speak out or speak up on a particular subject matter, or owning in on a particular area, to say that steadfast, this is my foundation, this is what I believe, and this is because that is what you're supposed to be doing. And when you're a professor, you're supposed to be owning in into a
Yes.
particular area so that you're shaping students. Can you give me a contrast, give the viewers a contrast then of when you attended the University of the Philippines and you did your study in comparison to now that you're teaching? What are some of the major differences that you observe and what you're seeing or struggling with?
Okay. When I was still a student in the University of the Philippines, that was a long time ago. Okay, just to give you a more specific information, I became a freshman in 1986, and I graduated in the 1990s. So fast forward to 2022, what's the difference? Basically, during our time, we were more focused on the print media. Even if we already had television and radio, there was no internet then. But right now, journalism is more multimedia. We are more flexible. in terms of adjusting to the medium that we use. So that's one. That doesn't mean that today's journalism curriculum is any better, or ours would be more inferior. It's just that it's able to adjust to the needs of the time. So right now, when we say multimedia journalism, it's not just print, but also radio, television, and even online.
Mhm.
So that's one aspect. Now, the other aspect that we need to also look at would be in terms of class differences among students. The composition of students during our time, many of us would come from either middle class or poor families. There were only a few rich students in our midst. And in fact, to give you a more accurate picture, the parking lots in the university, they would not be full of cars during our time. Maybe there would be one or two cars, and sometimes in the parking lot, we can even play badminton then.
Mhm.
That's how wide the parking area is. Right now, don't be surprised if you visit the university. It's very hard to park your car because it's hard to find parking spaces. Now, why am I telling you this? The composition
Mhm.
of students have drastically changed. Many of them come from rich families right now. So there is a bigger. Actually, when I started teaching in 2001,
Mhm.
I noticed that the number of rich students would be increasing. As time progresses, and right now there are a lot of them. And going back to the issue of the English language, many of those who speak English well, many of those who are more comfortable with the English language would come from
Mhm.
rich families. And that's why English would tend to become further entrenched, at least in our university.
Mhm.
There are other universities that cater to poor people, but the quality of education, I'm sorry to tell you, is something that leaves much to be desired. So that's why if you want to get a good education, it's either you end up in the University of the Philippines, where tuition is relatively cheaper. Actually, right now it's for free. So even the rich students get their free education, which is just fine because we are a public school.
Mhm.
But if you don't get admitted into UP and you still want quality education, you have to go to the private schools that whose quality is okay, but you have to pay a lot of money.
Mhm.
For rich students, it's not much of a problem, but of course, for the middle class and for the poor ones who want quality education, that could be a problem. So if you contrast our time and to the current situation, we have fewer rich students during our time. But right now, things have been quite different.
Very interesting. And so it is always a very interesting experience, then put it that way, when you have gone through your journey through those alls in your university, and now that you're teaching there, to see how it has evolved over the years. You mentioned something also as well that I want to touch on, and it's that connection between the politics and the media and journalism, in terms of, as you mentioned, there's so many different areas of journalism, and how is you
Hmm.
are red tag. And so you're not untouchable because you're in the teaching institution. You as just considered, do you consider yourself an activist then in your area, based on what you're seeing is happening, based on how journalists or anyone in print media or communication area putting out information is being treated, say, by government? And this is not just to what is happening in the Philippines. It is something that is happening across the globe now, where
Yes.
politics and journalism tends to connect.
Yeah.
There's great connection there, because we know politicians use the media for their own purpose. The media, in terms of being the first to break a story, actually want to be friends with a politician and so forth. But I want you to talk about the danger then that you mentioned, where people have been killed, where people are red tagged, where
Yeah.
whose lives were threatened. How so? How did the journalism in the Philippines become such such a minefield, or a war zone then in relation to politics or government?
Well, in the age of disinformation, you can't. It's inevitable for the media to be a war
Mhm.
zone, not just in the war for truth, but also in the quest for political power and influence by certain, nefarious characters or a certain social class
Yeah.
here in the country. So it's a war zone in the sense that, as you correctly noted, politicians would want to control the media so that they can help shape a narrative that would favor their own interests, even if the narrative would go against established facts. So that's why historical denialism has become quite normal here in the country. And that's why the dictator's son is able to win the presidency. Practically, he lied his way into being elected. And that's a given fact. He really lied. And some people tolerated that. Some journalists, ended up supporting him for the simple reason that it is in their interests to be uh, part of the incoming administration. You
Mhm.
would get a lot of political favors, as you correctly noted, if you're a journalist and you want to, cater to the interests of your sponsors or your principals. That
Mhm.
can get you rich. That can make you more powerful. So that's how it is right now. And of course, for those who are red tagged, like me, we tend to be the more principled ones. We tend to try to hold the line. We try to keep the torch of press freedom burning, so to speak, because that's something that we want to do. That's something that we hope will be our legacy,
Mhm.
and hopefully the youth would follow in our footsteps. I mean, I'm not getting young. Just for the record, I'm already 53 years old.
Mhm.
So I only have, a few decades left. Left. So we rely on the youth to continue with the struggle for social change. Now, why do we want that? Why can't we just shut up and just simply, let bygones be bygones, so to speak, and just go with the flow because nothing can ever change anyway. For us, that's a defeatist attitude
Mhm.
because we want a future. For example, I have a 6-year-old daughter right now who's turning 7. I want her to inherit a future that would be far different from what we're going through right now.
Mhm.
So you may say that I'm a selfish father for doing that, but my interest for my daughter also extends to the other children who may feel that they do not deserve the society that they live in right now. So we want to change that. And why do we want to change that? Because we want something that's good for everybody. You can call it meritocracy, you can call it genuine democracy, but definitely you cannot call it tyranny and impunity, which are the main characteristics of what's happening right now. Why
Mhm.
is there tyranny? People, people in power are doing whatever they want, even if they violate the law.
Mhm.
They can get away with practically anything right now. They lie, they cheat, they steal, and these are established facts. And
Mhm.
they deny the facts. And they use the media to, as I said, craft an alternative reality in a multiverse of madness, right? So that's where the problem, again, I'm using problem quite often right
Yeah.
now, but that's natural because we have a very, very problematic system. Now, part of our responsibility in the media is to expose such problems, even if it's very, very dangerous, and even if you can get red tagged in the process. But it has to be done. Because
Mhm.
if we won't do it, who will? if I give up now, what will my students think? Never mind what they think of me, but what will they think of the future, right? So if
Yeah.
I end up giving up now, most likely they will end up giving up as well. Oh, my professor gave up, so I might as well give up
Right.
as well. So we don't want that to happen. I mean, again, we really don't care what they think of me, but we would rather think of what they would think for their future. So the mindset should be fully developed among students so that they can really be brave enough to
Mhm.
struggle for social change. I mean, it's okay to be afraid, it's okay to be worried, but you have to remember it's something that you have to do, not for your sake, but for the sake of future generations. So that's the mindset that we're trying to promote.
How much investigative journalism do you teach?
Hmm.
Or is it
Well,
developed?
we also, yeah, actually, we promote not just investigative journalism, but also fact checking. Right now, we need more investigative journalists doing, unearthing
Yeah.
information, exposing, the truth, not just to the local community, but even to the international community. So
Mhm.
actually, we have a special course in investigative journalism. Our own publications do a lot of investigative journalism as well. The problem, again, with many news media organizations is media owners don't find it profitable to do investigative journalism. And in fact, they consider it as capital intensive. Why? Sometimes they're not comfortable with the idea of having a team of journalists doing nothing for 2 or 3 weeks, but just focused on one story.
Right.
They think more in terms of quantity in terms of instead of quality.
Yeah.
They would rather have one journalist doing, let's say, 6 news reports in one day instead of one journalist doing one investigative report, which is high quality, potentially Pulitzer Award winning, but it would
Mhm.
take you 2 weeks to do that, or even 1 month to do that. So they don't want that. So again, that's, I'm using problem quite often, but that's a very problematic aspect
Mhm.
in terms of the kind of media ownership that we have right now that is more focused on quantity instead of quality of journalistic output.
Does the School of Journalism at the University of the Philippines, do you guys have your own media department where students get the internship, the those skills that are needed, or do you find that you students have to seek externship in major organizations, or where do you send your students to actually get the practical skills?
Yeah, we have an internship program where they are required to work as journalists, as interns rather, doing journalism work in selected news media organizations, including our own media organization. So we are accredited by my own department, which is fine because I'm a faculty member there. So it's okay for them to do that.
Right.
The internship program is one. They are required to do one semester's work of journalism. Second, we have our own radio station. It's called DZUP. They can hone their radio broadcasting skills there if they want to. But it's not really. If I'm Yeah, okay. I'm trying to recall. I think it's an elective course, so they're not really required to do that, but they can do that on their own as
Mhm.
well. We also have, just like other schools, we have campus publications. We have a local college publication. We also have a student publication of the entire university. I used to be editor of the Philippine Collegian, which is the official student publication of the university.
Mhm.
So it's a good venue, and I usually suggest to many journalism students to try out campus journalism so that they can complement whatever they learn in the classroom uh, you know uh, to what's happening in school.
Mhm.
And they do that as part of their extracurricular work. Just like other schools, being part of a campus publication doesn't earn you credits in
Mhm.
your in your academic work, but it's good venue for you to learn the
Okay.
skills. Now, the ones that get credit would be our internship program. So yeah, so that's about it.
With the danger that is kind of the atmosphere then, with the with media and politics, how does that impact enrollment in your program, in the journalism program?
Of course, there's reason to for journalism students to worry what might happen to them. So
Mhm.
we try to be as truthful as possible. We tell them what the situation is, and we teach a very very important lesson, even among first year students. You have to get involved as early as now. 2 years ago, one of the biggest networks in the Philippines was shut down by the government because of alleged violations in its franchise. But we all know that it was shut down because it was very critical of the government.
Mhm.
And we told students, look, we need to protest this. And they said, yes, we will go with you. We will march with you. So, you can argue that we are promoting activism in our university, and we are, trying to brainwash our students. But the situation in the country is you need to be involved. You need to assert your rights. You need to stand up, to denounce what is wrong.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
there are certain aspects of activism that can be useful in journalism. Part of it would be critical analysis. Because journalism, it's not just about presenting the data, it's about making sense of the reality. And you need an analytical framework to, make sense, make better sense of what's happening in society.
Mhm.
Investigative journalism can have anti-establishment manifestations there, especially if you're exposing corruption and wrongdoing. I
Mhm.
mean, can an investigative journalist be neutral about corruption? I
Mhm.
mean, you have to take a stand against corruption in order to more effectively analyze,
Mhm.
the issue that you're reporting. So that's the mindset among students. So to be frank with you, did we suffer in terms of enrollment? Partly yes, but it's because of the pandemic.
Okay.
The reality, the killings of journalists, sometimes there's reason for parents to worry. I
Mhm.
mean, of course, if their sons or daughters are, venturing into a profession that is inherently dangerous, there
Mhm.
is reason to worry. But, there are no guarantees in this particular world.
Mhm.
Even if you're a dentist, you might die the next day because of, well, for whatever reason. I mean, I'm not trying to be morbid or anything, but once from our experience, if you're able to be frank with your students, if you're straightforward about the situation, they appreciate it more.
Mhm.
Instead of sugarcoating the truth, or instead of providing the wrong values where, okay, you can be a journalist, but just obey the government. Or, okay, you can be a journalist, but only focus on fashion and other harmless, it's a bit sexist, lipstick bits. I think that's what they call it, the soft news that is churned out, like show business, sports, fashion, and all that. But
Mhm.
we don't do that. We tell students these are the hard facts,
Mhm.
but you are needed all the more because this is the call of the times.
Mhm.
So once you're able to drive home that message, uh, students would know and would better appreciate what they're up against and
Mhm.
what they should expect if and when they graduate.
Danilo Arao, I am so appreciative of all this information. I just want to summarize. Our
Yeah,
actual topic was supposed to be about great inflation, but you just
yeah.
get me so
Well, we can
interested
talk about
in
it at another time. Yeah,
you get me so interested in your journalism program at the University of the Philippines and the state of journalism as it unfold in this current era, the impact of globalization, job outsourcing, the influence, even colonialism, post-colonialism, all those effects. and just, the influence of politics in the midst of it. And it is so very, very much interesting. And for one of the reasons why I asked you about how all of this is impacting the students in your program, or future students thinking about coming to the program, is because we want to influence youth, as you mentioned, to understand that this is the way forward, that it's not the niceties of doing showbiz and all that, is to get into investigative journalism to uncover the truth. And I want you to have the last word for, about a 45 seconds to a minute, and just wrap it up for us and tell
Yeah.
us, what is it you want families who are deciding to, kind of help their kid to make a decision about going into the journalism, regardless of the area of it, to understand, why it is so important to uncover the truth versus shying away from it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, of course, in the age of disinformation, in the age of post-truth, even in the age of globalization, we need truth warriors out there. And journalists are basically, the truth seekers and the truth tellers of the world. So there's always space for people to venture into journalism. And I hope that they would consider, a career in journalism, although of course career may not be the right word, because journalism is more of a commitment to the truth and a commitment, to serve the marginalized and the underrepresented. We have to remember that journalism is supposed to provide a voice for the voiceless. And if you have the passion for that, and you have the skills in writing, in reporting that go with it, then journalism is definitely for you. But regardless of the profession that you choose, you have to think of the people. And when I say people, we talk about the poor more often than necessary. Why? Because we need to empower everybody, and we need to create a society where everybody will be benefiting from the fruits of our labor, and no one will be left behind. And that's what living is all about. And again, if you want to venture into journalism, I would be thankful. But more than that, the voiceless would be more thankful to you. So that's all I have to say, Sonia. And again, thank you for this opportunity to talk to you.
It has been so very much rewarding for me. You're chock full of information, and I really do want to talk to you again, though, because your introduction actually, piqued my interest on a couple topic areas that I really would love to talk to you again about. But thank you so much for doing this, and this is very, very, very good information, Daniel.